Yeah, hi, good evening, folks. You're not doing great. All right, so let's get started. Share my screen. I'm just putting in the chat. Our last module and this module was TLC. And I'll be sharing my screen now. Oh, I hope you both can see my screen. So what do we have? Remember yesterday we started with the STLC, and STLC is software testing lifecycle, wherein we have these 6 phases from the testing perspective. So we went ahead with the requirement planning, where this time all the requirements are being analyzed again, but from the testing perspective. Okay. And then we had the another one, which is test planning. Test planning was more like an authoritative activity. There also it is more works like a tool plan for everyone. And the next that we talk about here is the test case development. Now, what do you mean by this test case development here is, see, what happens with the test case development here is, we primarily go with creating the test cases. Now, what happens with this? I'll tell you. I'll open the document where I'll be sharing these documents with you also. Just let me know, so that you'll know that, okay, this is how a test case may look like. In total, like these things. Let me share my screen again. Right? See, the one that you are seeing in here right now, this is how a test case document may look like. So here, as you can see, this is what we call as test cases. See what this is. I'll tell you. See what happens now. This is what we call as test case document. Now, test case document is all about having the details of test cases. See what happens here now. This is your test case document. Now, how these test case documents are actually here. These test case documents will contain the test cases. Now, this is a one test case, this is another test case. Test case is actually having the details of everything you want to test. What you will test, how you will test, any data that you will use, how you would expect from your application to behave. And then this is actually a section here. And then when you will have the application, then you'll go with the actual result. If both of these are matching, then it's a pass. If both of these are not matching, then it's a fail. You can even have the screenshot attached here as well. So basically, you will design this document, you will create this document as a QA, and you will use it in two phases in STLC. One is your test case design. So in this, till this point, you will do in test case design. And this part, what do we call as test case execution? Now, what do you mean by test case design and execution? Design you do when you have requirements, not application. So you don't have application and you write all this till this point here based on to requirements. Because based on the requirement, you will create what you have to test, how you'll test, any data, and expected result. And then when you will have application, then what you will do? You will fill in these two values. So basically, this is a document which is used in multiple phases. That is how it is. And you would see this depending upon how you're creating these test cases. So this is how a test case document may look like. Now in this test case document also, you would see this scenario. You'll see that scenario is saying, now what is scenario? Scenario is in actually scenario, what they do is they create, this is actually created by your, what do you call as, these, high level. Wherein what we would be having here is high level idea, what to test. This you get, see, we have a separate documentation that from there only they are getting these numbers. This is how a test scenario may look like. Basically, it is created by your test leads or your managers in testing. They tell you what exactly you're supposed to fill here, right? So based on to this now, see, under this scenario, you're gonna have different test cases. See? Okay. Now, other than these two, we also have one more document. And that document is your this. This is what we call as we call it as RTM document. Right? Now, what is that RTM document? RTM document actually is requirement traceability matrix. You see here? Now, what this document would be, I'll tell you. See, as you can see in this document, we have BRD, FSD, test case document. What is this? Requirement traceability document is actually taking data or having data from multiple documents. And it helps you to trace the requirement. Now, what's the point of tracing the requirement? So you don't trace requirement. You trace the implementation of requirement. Because I told you in the beginning, what you do here in software development is you have requirement and your team will create an application based onto that requirement. And what these applications are all about, these applications are just the implementation of requirements into features and functionalities in the application. All right. So now what happens with this document, you can track that back that if these requirements are actually converted, not converted into features and functionalities or not. And how will you know about that? See, I'll tell you. First of all, you'll have something known as business requirement document and functional specification document. Both of these can be one document or two different documents. It's all about having the requirements because both of these documents are requirement documentation. Here you have requirements at high level. Here you have at low level, like more detail. That is what you have. Ultimately, both are requirements. Then you have the priority, like which requirement is of what priority. So this you will be getting till here from your requirement documents. Now, once your requirement document details are here, then you will take data from your test case document. Now, test case document, what you have here is test case document, you have test case ID, execution status, and defect number. Now, this data you will get from the test cases. And check that in here. What we are getting from here is test case ID, pass fail status, and defect number. Defect number will be only there if there is a defect, if it is failing. Because once a test case fails, we mark it as an error. That is how it all goes off. You can check that up. That for which specific requirement, what are the test cases created, and what was the result of that test case execution. So this is not a document which will be all created in one go, no. Because when you look at these, all the phases up in here, this requirement traceability matrix, RTM. RTM will be created here, and RTM will be updated till this point. So when you are creating the test cases, you are putting the data into RTM. And when you are executing the test cases, that data also you are putting in the RTM. So when you are creating it, you are putting that up in here. And when you are executing it, you are putting that data up in here. Now I'll say that, okay, we are putting all of this data in RTM, but what's the use? The use here is what I told you here. Tracing the implementation. Tracing the implementation based onto the requirement. Right? So based onto the requirement, now what would happen here is that based onto these requirements, whether these test cases are passing successfully or not. But what does it convey? If it is a pass, then it will convey that one-way ticket booking is successfully implemented as a feature or functionality in the application. Round-way ticket is successfully implemented as a feature or functionality in the application. Multi-city ticket booking is having some errors. It is not implemented successfully in the application. Payment by credit card is implemented successfully. Payment by debit card is not implemented successfully because it is having some errors. And payment by reward points, we have not even tested yet. Don't see anything in here, which means it is not even tested. Yet to test that particular. That is what we have implemented. That is how it all goes on. That is how it all goes. And this is what this RTM document is all about. So requirement analysis is over, planning is done, then test case development. Now they'll start with the test case development, and in this itself, we'll go with the RTM document. So towards the end of this, as you can see, we have requirement document as the entry criteria, because I told you that we'll create these test cases based on to the requirement. And we will have test cases, data, and RTM. If we are using automation, we're gonna have the test script as well. This is what we're gonna do, getting test cases, test data, reviewing and baselining the test cases and scripts as well. That is all what we're gonna do in this. Then we have something known as test environment setup. Now, environment setup. What do you have the environment setup here is? Environment setup is basically when you have to test. Right? You need a setup where you can test it. That setup could be all of those. You will see all of this in like here itself. It is not that you have to do it. To do that, what you have here is that environment we talked about. Sometimes the test team is not going to be up in here. It is done by your development team or customer is actually providing you that. So this is what the test environment would be there. Now to test whether the test environment is okay or not, you need to check for smoke test cases. Now smoke testing is a type that you would be getting to get the readiness of the test environment. So in this, we'll be setting up the test environment. Now, when you go next, you have test execution. Now, the test execution that we have up in here, you have something known as test case execution. Execution is actually when you have this. You have to result in pass fail. You will raise defects. And those defects will be pointed out up in here. Not only raising the defects, what you would also do is you will also perform retesting. What is retesting? Retesting is you have got that requirement in it. You got it here. Now in this, how it's gonna go up in here is retesting. What is retest? You report that defect to the development team. Development team is fixing those defects. And then they kind of give you a notification saying that, hey, this defect is fixed. But you're not going to believe their words. You will test it again. So to raise that defect, what did you do? You made some test cases failed. You will run those test cases again to check whether the defect is still there or not. This is retesting. We'll talk about retesting in detail in our upcoming sessions. So for this, you had test plan document, test cases, test data, and test environment, and you went ahead with the test case execution report, defect report, and the RTM entries. So you went ahead with primarily testing whole of your application. That is what you did with this execution phase. So you executed the test, you documented the test results, logged the defects, you mapped the defects to test cases and RTM, you retested the defect fixes, and you track the defects to closure until and unless it is closed. So you keep retesting that. Finally, we can close it off with a test case closure, right? Wherein you're going to come up with a test case closure report and metrics will be prepared depending upon whatever you guys have done so far in the testing. Because we have to call it off. So there will be a meeting which will be called out to evaluate what are the cycle completion criterias. Now, this cycle completion criterias, whether we should end it or not, this is all mentioned in test plan. So you just need to refer to the test plan and you'll see that, okay, how much of test coverage we got, quality, time, cost, software, business objectives, whether all of those are meeting up in here. And if not meeting, then what level we are meeting all of these. Based on to that, it will be done. Test artifacts will be analyzed to identify these strategies, which we can go for the similar projects in future, right? And if let's say the test team face any issues, like any process bottlenecks, any problems, so they will look at those problems so that they can avoid those problems in the upcoming projects. Test metrics will be prepared, closure report will be prepared just to make sure that documentation in place. And so for this, we have the entry criteria as test case execution and defect report. And based onto that, a closure report and test metrics will be prepared. And because we are closing it off now, so ultimately in this, there will be a lot of activities. We will evaluate the cycle completion criteria depending on time, test, coverage, cost, software. This I told you that this is all defined in your test plan. We'll prepare the test metrics, then we'll document the learnings out of this project. We'll prepare test closure report. We'll go with the qualitative and quantitative reporting, right? Qualitative and quantitative reporting, as in like how many defects were there, defect distribution report, what type of defects were there, right? Depending upon their type and severity, all that would be here. That is what it would be here in this. So that is how we have these all 6 phases in STLC. This is actually the complete testing process. Right? So we went ahead with all of these. So we talked about these STLC faces, and this is how the total STLC would go off with this. That is how it is. So this is all about the STLC. I will look into the other aspects of this as well, but this is like the process, what we have here based on to the details that we have this up in here. I've shared this in the chat already, so you can get that from here. This is going to be, and the other documents also I'm putting in the chat. The traceability matrix and this test scenario. Refer to that. Share that in the chat as well. Right. This is what we have for the day today. Do you have any questions? Or we call it today?
No, Rajat.
Right one. Then yeah, it's going to be all up in here. And we'll go ahead with that. Right. Thank you so much, folks, for joining in, and we'll meet tomorrow.